This meeting will come to order. I'm glad to be here with the ranking member, Sheriff McCormick, to continue our work. I first want to thank Representative Frank Mervan for his leadership during the last Congress. I really did enjoy working with him, and as I've stated and he stated, this is one of the most bipartisan committees that we found that there was a lot of joint work together, and we're hoping to be able to do the same thing as we move forward. We did, however, expose serious mismanagement in several of the largest VA information technology systems. And now my goal is to motivate the VA to get these efforts back on track or put better strategies in place when that is not possible. These IT systems exist to make the delivery of care and benefits to our veterans easier to schedule, easier to access, and easier to track, thereby keeping our veterans healthier and happier. Their purpose is not to churn out cushy contracts for technology companies. Unfortunately, the Beltway and Silicon Valley need to be reminded of that constantly. We are here today to discuss Vista, the platform that 97% of the Veterans Health Administration relies on to care for our veterans. It's no secret that Vista was originally developed 40 years ago and CPRS was introduced 25 years ago. It's also no secret that Vista is a vast collection of hundreds of systems that do everything from prescriptions to staffing to accounting to tracking car accidents. It is less well understood where the replacement and modernization efforts of 10 and 20 years ago left Vista. When the Cerner project began, some in the VA thought they could stop paying attention to Vista. Some in Congress thought so too. There was a discussion of a pivot plan, which initially seemed to be a plan to mothball Vista. As the Cerner completion schedule slipped farther and farther into the future, the pivot plan faded. The reality is, regardless of whether the Oracle Cerner implementation can be accomplished, and regardless of how we feel about that, the VA will probably continue to rely on Vista for at least another decade. And some of the elements of Vista will probably never go away because no replacement even exists. Medical centers all over the country and the veterans they serve cannot be left in limbo. Let me say this as plainly as I can. Running Vista into the ground would be a disastrous mistake. It must be maintained. And within the technical constraints that exist, VA should be identifying the key areas of Vista that need to be modernized and are feasible to undertake. That's already happening in a few cases, and I want to explore them this afternoon. Let me be clear, there will be no more blank checks and low expectations for EHR projects. Vista and Oracle Cerner and any other EHR will be judged by the same standards. And those standards are patient safety, reliability, user satisfaction, and cost. It is not complicated. We have two esteemed panels of experts here with us today to do just that. And I want to welcome our witnesses. I appreciate you being here. With that, I would yield to Ranking Member Sheriff McCormick for her opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm honored to serve as the ranking member on the Technology Modernization Subcommittee. Before coming to Congress, I was a healthcare executive for many years. I know firsthand the critical role that technology plays in the provision of healthcare and fully understand that just about everything the VA does relies on computers and other technologies. I would like to welcome our witnesses today and thank you for coming to discuss VA's long-serving electronic records, Vista. While we all know that the VA is in the midst of a major modernization effort to replace Vista, it is also important to note that the system will be around as long as it needs to be. Least as long as it needs to be, as long as the modernization program takes. It is imperative that the VA not only maintains Vista until the replacement system is fully deployed, but also keeps up the healthcare innovation as best as the system allows. Veterans who rely on the VA for their health care deserve no less. There are functions of Vista that are not related to the EHR and would likely exist long after the EHR is replaced. To be clear, we realize that Vista is more than EHR, but my goal today is to focus on the EHR capabilities. VA has spent almost 20 years, and according to the Comptroller General, over $1.7 billion in failed attempts to modernize Vista. Numerous experts told this committee that Vista is not a viable long-term solution and must be replaced. There are concerns about the cybersecurity risk, data management, and code-based consideration to be obsolete by many. Also, the 130-plus different instances of Vista do not reliably communicate with each other, let alone the DoD or community care providers. We must do better. Before I conclude, I would like also to congratulate my colleagues, Mr. Rosendale, on being selected as the chairman for the subcommittee. I look forward to working with you this Congress to ensure the VA has the resources and technology it needs to provide the world-class health care and benefits that our nation's veterans have earned and so richly deserve. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I would like to now introduce the witnesses on both panels. First, from the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have Mr. Daniel McCune, Mr. Michael Girbino, Ms. Emily Chu from the Office of Information and Technology. We also have Mr. Charles Hume, Dr. Thomas O'Toole from the Veterans Health Administration. Thank you all for being with us today. Our second panel, we have a distinguished group who led the VA information technology during the Obama and Trump administrations. Mr. Roger Baker served as the Assistant Secretary for Information and Technology from 2009 to 2013. Mr. James Jiffer served in the same position from 2018 to 2021, and Mr. Peter Levin, who was the VA Chief Technology Officer from 2009 to 2013. I ask the VA's first witnesses on our first panel to please stand and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, and let the record reflect that all the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Mr. McCune, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Rosendale, Ranking Member Sherfless McCormick, and distinguished members of the panel. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the Department of Veteran Affairs, Health Information Systems and Technology Architecture, or Vista. I am accompanied by Chuck Hume, Chief Informatics Officer in VHA, Dr. Thomas O'Toole, Deputy Assistant Undersecretary for Health, Mike Gerbino, Director of Health Infrastructure and Systems Management at IT, and Emily Q, Director of Health Informatics and IT. Veterans are at the center of everything we do, and VA is committed to providing exceptional care, services, and a seamless, unified experience to the veteran. To fulfill this mission, VA clinicians must have modern tools to ensure best outcomes for our veterans. OIT collaborates with VHA and other VA offices to achieve this mission through delivery of state-of-the-art technology, including a modernized electronic health record, or EHR. Vista provides an EHR for veteran care and services supporting over 150 applications in more than 1,500 VA facilities. There are 133 instances of Vista nationwide that share common functionality but have data and workflow tailored to the needs of each medical center and patient population. Vista has served VA and veterans for over 40 years, and we are aware of its limitations. It doesn't have modern capabilities like artificial intelligence, machine learning, mobile and web access, and capabilities providers and veterans expect and deserve from a modern cloud-native EHR. In 1997, VA implemented a new graphical user interface on top of Vista called Computerized Patient Record System, or CPRS. CPRS is a Windows desktop application that provides an improved, yet dated, user interface for accessing Vista data. Vista itself is written in an old programming language called MUMPS. There are few MUMPS programmers today. MUMPS is not taught in computer science classes, and the pool of MUMPS programmers shrinks every year as they retire. VA is fortunate to have dedicated MUMPS programmers supporting Vista. They understand millions of lines of code, developed over 40 years, and they also understand VA clinical business processes. They're committed to enabling clinicians, supporting veteran outcomes, and we've been able to retain them and their knowledge much longer than a typical workforce. However, approximately 70% of our MUMPS developers today are retirement eligible, and we have few options to hire or contract additional ones. Vista is a member of VA's expansive and complex ecosystem of software and infrastructure. The size and complexity of that technology ecosystem has nearly doubled in the last 5 years, and most of that growth has been in modern cloud-native applications. MUMPS programmers are increasingly challenged keeping Vista integrated in a growing ecosystem that is architected very differently from the system designed 40 years ago. While technology is a challenge, so also are the dated skills of our Vista programmers. That challenge compounds every year. In May 2018, after nearly a year of analysis, VA decided to replace Vista with a COTS solution, Cerner Millennium. However, VA will continue to use Vista and until Cerner Millennium is fully implemented. During this time, it's essential to maintain and enhance Vista to preserve the uninterrupted care and continually improve the veteran service. Some of the key recent Vista enhancements include standardizing Vista code. We call this our national gold version. Move to cloud. 20 instances of Vista have been moved to the cloud with an additional 54 planned this year. Improving access to federated health data by implementing an API gateway. Currently, there is no cost reduction tied to the new EHR solution. The cost to support Vista will increase as we develop new capabilities and interfaces, support congressional mandates, and migrate to cloud. In essence, we are supporting 2 EHR systems simultaneously until the Cerner implementation is complete. In the interim, Vista remains our authoritative source of veteran data, and in summary, Vista is an old technology, ill-suited for the modern digital age. Modernization would require Vista be rewritten almost from scratch at a great cost and great risk. Chairman Rosendale, Ranking Member Shurflis McCormick, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss OIT's improvement of Vista. This concludes my testimony, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCune. I appreciate that. And we're going to go straight to questioning. I mentioned in my remarks I judge any EHR or any system that supports health care according to patient safety, reliability, user satisfaction, and cost. Does the VA typically or currently use any other criteria for establishing what they would like to have?
That is a good start, sir. I think we do look at reliability and availability of the system to access to our critical health information systems is very important to our veterans and to our clinicians.
Do you have any other criteria that you're using? Because reliability and customer satisfaction, the cost, these are all things that we're already looking at.
Yes, sir.
And what would they be? And exactly why would you be using these other criteria?
So, thank you for the question. If we're looking at how do we gauge success of a large-scale implementation, is that the question?
Sure.
Okay. So there's a number of factors that we use. The ones you mentioned, scope, schedule, and cost certainly are high on that list. Customer satisfaction also high on the list. Those are ones that we look at. We look at the technical viability and how it fits in our ecosystem. I mentioned our large ecosystem. Those are all elements that we take into account.
Do you take into account the ratings or the consideration from the employees themselves, the ability for them to work with the system and the problems that it may not cause, or the efficiency that it delivers to them?
Yes, sir. We consider both the veteran experience and the user experience.
And how exactly are you measuring that?
We have a number of different ways to measure that, sir. One of the key ways we look at that is both the accessibility and the performance of that system. So we look at numbers, how many clicks does it take, how many screens do they need to see, how performant is that system. Those are all measures that we use to gauge user acceptance.
And are you going back and having a poll conducted with the actual users and the patients to see what their experience has been?
Yes, sir. I think that's an excellent question for our VHA partners. I would ask Mr. Hume to answer that question.
Sir, last year we did the initial survey of users in VISN 10 and 20. That's where the Cerner product is currently deployed. And we used standard survey questions developed by CLASS. I don't recall what that acronym is for, but it's an industry leader who surveys the electronic health record systems across the country and user experience with that. And we got some baseline data from that survey last year.
Okay, so where's the survey? That's what I'm looking for right there. Okay, so I happen to have a copy of that survey, and I've got some serious concerns about this, okay? And after being 4 years of in service, the VA's version of Cerner ranked dead last in this survey that I'm looking at. Do they have a copy of this? Okay, do I have to enter this into the record, or is it already? Okay, it's already in. Okay, after 4 years, according to this survey, 78% of the users, so these are the docs, right? 78% of the users don't feel that it helps them deliver high-quality care. 78%, we're talking about almost 8 out of 10. On the other hand, 64% said that Vista enabled them to deliver high-quality care. It's almost a complete flip-flop of that. Now, we're talking about after billions of dollars have been expended, we're talking about several years to try and work through this system, and we're talking about at some of the smallest facilities in the country, not more of the complex centers that the VA is even responsible for. So my question would be, Vista and CPRS, Mr. McCune, does anything in the CLOS report surprise you?
Sir, I think, thank you for the question. I would say no, sir. I think we're getting a lot of signal around that. What I would say is with Vista, we have a relatively stable system, one that's been in production for 40 years. So our clinicians, our users are very, very familiar with that system. What we also have happening is a brand new system, a Cerner system. So I think there is some element of change management there. There's some element of newness that has to be considered there. But we are aware of those numbers, sir, and we are tracking those.
So even though Vista is this old, why do most of the employees like it so much, Mr. McCune?
Sir, I would defer to our VHA partners on that one. Mr. Hume.
I'll invite Dr. O'Toole to answer as a user of CPRS.
Thank you, Congressman. I think the issue with CPRS, and having been using it myself for the past 17 years, is that when it accomplishes what we need, it does represent high reliability, but I would be neglectful to not say it doesn't have its own problems, and it does not provide a lot of the functionality that we see in different EHRs and more modern EHRs. But there is a muscle memory associated with using it for quite some time that I believe providers are comfortable with. They know how to use it, they know how to navigate the system, and it's worked well for us.
Sheriff McCormick, you have questions?
Yes, thank you. Researchers have noted current challenges with Vista and how it negatively impacts healthcare delivery and operations to include quality healthcare delivery, security, care standardization, lack of system standardization, data standardization, access controls, and efficient business operations. That's no small list of problems. Would you agree that those areas are of concerns?
Yes, ma'am. I would agree with you. There is a long list with our legacy technology and our legacy Vista platform.
On the major issue of lack of standardization, I realize that this is partly the fault of the VHA and their lack of prioritization of creating a standard healthcare record. How difficult would it be to standardize the health records across the separate instances of Vista across the country, and how long would it take?
Thank you for that question, ma'am. That is a long, complex question, and we have not done the analysis on that. We have tried over the last 40 years many times to tackle that problem. If you'd like, we can do the analysis and come back with a plan.
Just for information, how many instances of Vista are there? Is it 130 instances?
So it's technically it's 133.
33. And in other situations, have we seen any organization try to actually standardize? What would be that average time? Have we seen it in 50, 60? What would that standard time, if we don't know what 133 variations would be?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Ma'am, I don't think we have a good comparable. I think that's what you're asking. Do we have a good comparable? I don't think we have a comparable. Nothing is the size and scale of our EHR. That's one of our largest It is our largest technology system.
There has been some discussion in Congress and elsewhere to make another attempt to modernize Vista and abandon the current Oracle Cerner system. I'm not here to say that Oracle Cerner approach in EHRM is going well, but I'm not sure returning to Vista is correct either. We have heard from inside VA that VA does not have the expertise or the desire to go the pathway of modernizing Vista, which would itself take several $billion. Other large IT contracts, and large management contracts such as the VA has today. Is that accurate?
Thank you for that question, ma'am. I think if I heard you correctly, that's a fair summarization.
What is precluding VA from taking a more measured approach?
So, ma'am, as we look to our limited resources, right, our resource constraints and how we focus those, we have them currently 100% focused on the current EHR implementation. And so we don't have extra people working on a plan B. So we are fully committed to this until such a time as we need to change course. All of our resources, both our people and our funding, are allocated towards a successful Cerner implementation.
My largest concern with the current EHRM program is that staff do not feel like their concerns are being taken into account, which is resulting in potential patient harm. Is there not a better way to provide a better rollout of Oracle Cerner system while also providing some clarity on what will and won't be available for their use in Vista?
So thank you for that question. Ma'am, I think what you have today are the people representing Vista. I don't think we're the right people to represent the EHRM solution or the challenges that they're facing, so I would defer that question. We can take that for the record.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. I would now go to my friend from Texas, Representative Self.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to explore the cloud migration. First of all, I'm not an IT person. I've looked for it in your testimony. What is the IRIS for Health 2022.1? What does that mean?
So, sir, I think can you repeat your question?
What is your reference to IRIS for Health 2022? It's part of your cloud migration testimony?
Yes, sir. Sir, Mr. Gerbino, can you answer that question?
Yes, sir. It is our database platform that we're upgrading to. That brings us new capabilities.
So you're upgrading Vista, the platform as well, plus migrating it to the cloud. How much does it cost to move it to the cloud? When will you complete that, and how important is that for the future?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. So cloud migration is an important component in maintaining and enhancing Vista. I would say that the version of cloud migration that's taking place today is what we call a lift and shift, meaning we're not changing Vista, we're simply taking it out of our data center and moving it into a virtual cloud environment. So that's what we call a lift and shift. We're in midstream there. About 20 instances today have been migrated, an additional 54 planned this year. That is not modernization. Modernization, making it a cloud-native application, would involve rewriting that code. I think you asked about costs, sir. I think it cost us around $70,000 per instance to move it to the cloud.
For 130? Rough?
Yes, sir. Roughly, it would be about $70,000 per instance.
And is Cerner going to be on the cloud?
Yes, sir. Cerner is in the cloud.
Okay. And let's move to the community care providers. How many providers do you refer veterans to?
Sir, I'll hand that off to Mr. Hume.
Sir, I think we're going to have to take that one for the record. We do health information exchanges with 130, with the members of the eHealth Exchange, the National eHealth Exchange, as well as Commonwealth and Care Quality. We're moving toward Care Quality. So we do information exchanges with partners who have joined a health information exchange, but that is not the universe of providers that we refer patients to.
And then tell me how Vista integrates with 70,000. What's the integration there? Is there any?
Sir, 70, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question, sir. Can you repeat that?
For your community care providers that you coordinate with, how does Vista integrate with them? And then I'd like to compare Cerner to that as well.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to ask my partner, Ms. Q, to answer that question. What I can tell you in broad statements is the integration that VA does, Vista does, with our community care providers is not nearly as comprehensive or as native as what we have with Cerner. So we are doing some things to do that integration. Ms. Q, can you answer that question?
Sure, thank you, Mr. McCoon. So to communicate with our community care providers, we implemented a solution called VDIP, stands for Veterans Data Integration and Federation Platform. So this platform is connecting to Cerner JHE. At request, VDIP would respond with the longitudinal patient record to Cerner JHE, and then Cerner JHE would relay that message back to the community care providers.
You just addressed Cerner, correct?
That's correct. We use Cerner JHE to connect to two networks. One is Commonwealth, and the other is eHealth Exchange Network, which Cerner JHE connects to.
So you already have a complex system of both Vista and Cerner in your coordination with your community care providers. Is that correct? Am I hearing that right?
So to make the community care communication work, we are using both VDIP solution and Cerner JHE solution to make it work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sounds complex to me.
Thank you very much. I would now yield to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Lansman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the time, and thank you all for your service and for being here today. A few questions, three, and some of this I suspect you can speak to today, and some of it you'll have to, circle back. One has to do with what we've learned from the 5 sites where this has been implemented. Columbus is close to where I serve in Southwest Ohio and Cincinnati, but Walla Walla, Roseburg, Spokane, White City. What are the high-level takeaways from these pilots? I mean, what would be most helpful for us to know in terms of what you've seen, both the good and the bad, in these 5 sites?
Thank you, Congressman. I do want to circle back, if I can, for just a second on the cloud question. I think the question was, is Cerner in the cloud? While the target is to move Cerner or to have Cerner in the cloud, it is not currently in the cloud today, so that's a work in progress. I just wanted to correct that. To your question, sir, I think I'm going to defer that to Dr. O'Toole.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We've learned a lot from the 5 deployments. I think it has exposed a lot of challenges in both product and product development, refinement, our staff training, and stresses to the system. Yeah. It is a learning curve. Some provider groups have fared better than others in terms of their adoption. I think that the decisions to date by the agency to put a hold on the Boise deployment, to put a hold on the Ann Arbor deployment, reflect the fact that we are actively working to make improvements, both to what we do internally, to what's expected of the product, to what's expected of the deployments before we go live with additional sites.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's helpful, and perhaps for the record, so this is a request to just better understand what the high-level, learnings, takeaways have been, both positive and negative. I mean, I know we are struggling on a whole host of levels, but what's promising? What do you feel good about, or what do you see as big opportunities? And I'm assuming that's part of what we'll see more of after the pause, right? I mean, once, we don't have to get in, if there's high-level stuff you want to share, please do, but I do think it would be helpful for us to better understand those big takeaways.
No, thank you, and I definitely appreciate the importance of the question. There will be a report that is still in preparation that related to the sprint efforts that should be released shortly as it goes through, and I think that will help define many of the criteria that are expected to be in place for future go-lives that I think would answer some of those questions. So I would request that we take it for the record, pending that.
And then on the second question has to do with leadership changes at the integration office. As these changes have taken place, what are the gains that, I mean, what are we not losing, I think would be helpful to know. And how have you all managed or thought about that, the change in leadership as it relates to ensuring that what needs to be learned is learned and what needs to be changed is changed, and so on and so forth? I mean, that's a huge question I have, which is when you make a big leadership change, when you're dealing with this kind of complexity, how are you handling that?
Well, I just acknowledge that Dr. Neil Evans is taking over the office as the acting director, executive director, and we have great confidence in him. He's been a VA clinician for many years, and he's talented in this space, and we're looking forward to his leadership.
I think similar to the previous question, the gains that were and improvements, the opportunities that his predecessor, experienced, making sure those aren't lost. I mean, how do we, and things that obviously weren't going well. I think having a better understanding, and maybe that will be in the report or
In that position, there are 3 primary deputies, and they're all staying in place, and so there's good continuity at the next level down from the director.
And then finally, this has to do with the contracting. I mean, so much of this gets outsourced to, private companies. I think it would be helpful to this subcommittee to better understand what you're concerned about in terms of that contracting process. What is being communicated effectively when you're securing support from outside vendors? And this gets to some of the questions around the requirements, that may or may not have been articulated when you went out, to get help. It would help me to better understand how you all are approaching that moving forward, because clearly, it requires a tremendous amount of support, and the department's ability to get the right kind of help, having articulated the right set of requirements, is going to be very, very important. And I'm wondering if someone can speak to that and/or circle back.
Thank you for that question, sir. I think part of that answer is and we'll take back. I will address part of that question, which is us working with contractors, and I think your question is probably around accountability. Yeah. Working with vendors is a normal part of what we do in VA, and particularly in my area, which is systems development. Almost 85% of our workforce today is contracted, and so that is really a partnership between the govies and the contractors.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Representative. Dr. O'Toole, let's review the information that we have about Vista. The subcommittee submitted questions in advance of this hearing, and the VA has answered them. First, patient safety, which is a priority for everybody in this room. The VA provided statistics on the number of patient safety reports related to the system. How many patient safety reports were there in each of the last 3 years across the 166 medical centers and their clinics using Vista?
So I'm looking through my notes here in terms of what we submitted in response to that question.
Okay.
I believe the data, which reflected two different modes of presenting, shows a significant increase. It's not broken down by medical center. In terms of what are referred to as Joint Patient Safety Reports, or JASPRs, which reflects a concern raised by the field, not necessarily a validated concern, not necessarily something that was reflected in a safety event or patient harm, and I think that's an important.
So let me tell you the numbers that I have, and then
Yes.
you can tell me if this is accurate or not. But through the 166 medical centers and their clinics using Vista, we have in 2020, 12,644. In 21, we did have an increase. It was 14,637. But then in fiscal year 22, it went all the way down to 9,211. Dr. O'Toole, the information we have from Spokane for the 2 years after Cerner went live is 1,033 patient safety reports. And this is something that this committee has complained about for quite some time, extensively, bipartisan manner. That's over 500 reports per year from one hospital using Cerner. One hospital, compared to an average of 55 reports annually from the Vista hospitals. How do you explain this huge difference? In short, why has the Grand Man Staff VA hospital become the most dangerous VA hospital in the country?
Well, thank you for the question, sir. And again, I'm not going to try to minimize by any stretch the concerns that staff raised at Man Grant Staff and continue to raise at Man Grant Staff regarding safety concerns. And I think it has been well documented and well noted challenges that we've had with the deployment of the Cerner product, Cerner Millennial product, at Man Grant Staff, related to a lot of issues, not the least of which is deployment during the pandemic, deployment with significant concerns about product readiness, training, and so on. We are striving to be a high reliability organization. We continue to encourage these reports to be generated so they can be investigated and acted on. And to the extent that we continue to act on them, as reflected by the pauses that have occurred in our deployment of future sites, while actively deploying Tiger teams and others to address those concerns, I think has been well noted. But not to make any excuses about the concerns at hand, I will say that there have been improvements to the Cerner product over time, and we have made several improvements in the care delivery, in the work stream.
So can I just cut to the chase and say, would you attribute this increase to the Cerner system?
Yes, sir.
Dr. O'Toole, thank you. Dr. O'Toole, I asked the Office of Inspector General to identify the reports related to Vista and patient safety in preparation of this hearing. They looked back 6 years and found 5 reports. I'm going to enter this letter into the record, from the OIG into the record. These all involve automated view alerts, which let providers know test results are available, and the lack of ability to track who observes and acts on those alerts. What component of Vista generates and tracks these alerts, and how are you addressing this issue?
Well, I believe you're talking about alerts and reminders that the system generates, usually as a result of the configuration of our mandates to perform certain tasks, clinical tasks. Dr. O'Toole would be better to answer that. Perform certain tasks at certain times, and the providers are reminded through those alerts to perform those tasks.
So for clarification, is that what you're referring to, Congressman?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so the clinical reminder and clinical alert system within VA is something that has been used for decades now as a means of reminding providers, both for specific screening questions, view alerts for patients who may be at risk for certain events, as well as reminders for different clinical activities. It is something that is currently tracked and actively tracked and fed back to the department through our data and analytics group.
So again, the question was, what component of Vista generates and tracks these alerts, and how are you addressing this issue that they're not being resolved?
Well, sir, I think that there are several concerns with that, not the least of which is that there are probably too many alerts and not all of them are relevant. And there is an issue of alert fatigue, which we are actively looking at in terms of trying to streamline some of those alerts so that the most pertinent ones, the ones that are most timely to the clinical event and patient care issue and where the risk is highest, are those that are prioritized, and others that may be less important can be sunsetted. And that's a current and active issue that's going on. All of this clinical stations, though, do receive reports on compliance with that and are being tracked both nationally and locally in terms of their performance in that space.
Representative Sherfless McCormick, you have more questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the VA is itself admitting that it does not want and does not have the capacity to manage a Vista modernization, why would we, Congress, force them to?
Thank you for that question, ma'am. I don't think we're asking you to force us to do that, right? I think what we have today and what's before Congress is a difficult choice. We've got a system implementation underway today, and we have an aging and legacy system that we have struggled multiple times in the past to modernize. It is not an easy choice, sir, or ma'am. It is one that we're continually looking at.
Previous testimony indicates the VA spends about $800 million a year to maintain, improve, and stabilize Vista. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it accurate that VA continues to keep Vista healthy and plans to until the last proposed EHRM deployment is finished? In other words, the VA is not walking away from Vista today, correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Representative Self.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you've testified that you've delayed Boise and Ann Arbor. Given that you restart your Cerner rollout, when would you anticipate the last use of Vista?
Thank you for that question, sir. I think that timeline is a little uncertain. We have, as we started the Cerner rollout, we were planning for 10 years. Vista is our interim solution. It is an interim solution for an indefinite amount of time. 5 to 10 years is the time window we're looking at now, but that may extend.
So from what I'm seeing, let's take the 10 years out with the delays. What's Vista going to look like in 10 years? And let's go back to your mumps coders. This is not unique, by the way. Companies are pulling COBOL coders out of retirement. So it's not unique across the industry. Old programs are being resurrected because of their simplicity and so forth. But so what is Vista going to look like in 10 years?
Thank you for that question, sir. And we do have COBOL programmers as well. Okay. It is hard to tell what Vista is going to look like between now and then for a number of reasons. It's a moving target. Number one, we're going to need to make changes to Vista in order to support the Cerner rollout, particularly integrations. Number two, we're going to have emerging requirements from our clinicians, and so we're going to need to adapt Vista. We're also going to need to adapt Vista to changing technologies. You're seeing some of that right now with our move to cloud. So predicting 10 years from now, sir, that's difficult to do for Vista. But all the problems we've talked about, aging workforce, a programming language that's not taught today, all of those concerns are compounded, particularly if you talk about a 10-year window.
That leads me to the $17 billion for Cerner. You said it would be very expensive to rewrite Vista. Do you have a estimate on that?
No, sir, we do not. We have not done an analysis on a large-scale, full modernization of Vista. We have I think the committee is equally versed on the cost estimates for Cerner. We have not done that similar kind of cost estimate for Vista.
I would assume you did that, though, before you awarded the Cerner contract.
So, sir,
Because don't you examine all your options?
yes, sir. We considered all of our options back in 2017 and 2018. We had about a year's worth of analysis that went into making that decision. Any data we had around Vista and its viability for modernization is old and dated and we would have to revisit it.
I've been handed a piece of paper that looks like far more than my 17 billion. So you did or did not do that analysis before you awarded Cerna?
So, sir, thank you for that question. We did do the analysis back in 2017 and 18 on all of our options, and that's when we chose the Cerner solution.
Do you remember what the Vista rewrite was?
No, sir, I do not, but we can get that information.
I'd like to see that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Landsman. Oh, clear? Okay. Representative Surface McCormick, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2017, GAO issued a report documenting the challenges with the Vista's pharmacy system. The report was entitled, "Pharmacy System Needs Additional Capabilities for Viewing, Exchanging, and Using Data to Better Serve Veterans." Many of VA's plans to address the pharmacy system were to use the Oracle Cerner pharmacy solution as part of the EHR suite. If VA were to abandon the Oracle Cerner product, would VA need to go back and fix each of the pharmacy issues outlined in that report and others?
Well, many of those findings have been addressed over the last 5 years, so particularly with respect to a graphical user interface for pharmacy. We would have to take for the record the specific things that were done and were not done out of that report.
Do you know how many were already fixed versus how many are left?
We would have to take that, unless you're able to answer, Dan. No.
Okay. Vista may have less problems today, but is part of that because everyone knows how to use it and knows its quirks? It's like a stable old family car. Everyone knows you need to jiggle the clutch when it gets stuck in third gear. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, ma'am.
What patient safety issues comes up with Vista? My concern is the lack of coordination for all veterans, with a focus on veterans often overlooked and left out.
There are a lot of safety concerns within Vista that I would be neglectful to say don't exist. A lot of them are instance-specific and not necessarily generalized to the entire system. I think some of which we referenced earlier with the clinical reminders as one element, view alerts being another one. But yeah, again, it's difficult to kind of speak to it in generalities. I think we do a better job than most systems in a lot of our population health work, and a lot of our tracking of potentially vulnerable populations. Could it be done better? And could there be system improvements, either within Vista or within other systems to enhance those capabilities? I think are clearly questions that would need to be explored.
Thank you so much for your answers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Mr. McCune, let's turn to reliability on the system, uptime. According to the information provided, Vista's uptime in 2022 was 99.9967%. That's better than ivory soap. And in 2021, it was 99.999964%. This is almost perfect. That's excellent. How in the world is that possible, even through upgrades and changes?
Thank you for that question, sir. We strive to get to 4 nines. And with Vista, we've been able to do that. What I would say is that you have new systems Generally, as we release new systems, we have more issues, particularly with uptime and reliability, than we do with systems that have a long lifespan. So with Vista, for instance, we've had decades to work out the bugs, fine-tune performance, and that's how we're able to get to those high reliability rates.
So, Mr. McCune, is it true that if one Vista instance goes offline for whatever reason, some reason or another, the other instances may not be affected?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, so this brings me to one of the problems that I have been made aware of. How does that compare with the Cerner system? Because it's my understanding that when a system goes down, it's across all instances in many cases and during upgrade periods.
So, sir, I think I can speak to Vista. I don't feel comfortable speaking to the Cerner implementation and their configuration. I will tell you that they are on-prem today and they're looking to move to cloud. I would expect different kinds of availability once that migration is complete.
Okay, Mr. McCune, the VA also provided statistics on the workforce that maintains Vista. This committee has been hearing for years that the employees who are able to write the code are retiring. You said it just earlier, as a matter of fact, and can't be replaced. But the numbers don't bear that out. In 2022, 1,129 full-time equivalents, FTEs, worked on Vista. And 10 years ago, it was almost the exact same number at 1,134. It's only 5 people different. The VA seems to be maintaining a stable workforce even after all the challenges that everybody seems to be facing. So how are you able to keep those folks on?
Yes, thank you, sir, for that question. We have been fortunate. I think our employees are committed to the mission, and they've stayed long beyond what a typical workforce would stay. So that number I mentioned earlier, 70% retirement eligible, that number has been creeping up year over year. So eventually, we are going to start to lose them.
Eventually, but I mean, right now, that is the definition of a stable workforce. I mean, a 10-year period, and you have virtually the same number of people there. Mr. McCune, the VA provided figures for spending on Vista over the last 5 years. In 2022, VA spent, $890 million, including about $70 million in development. What factors drive the steady state cost, and how do you determine the amount to allocate development? And the reason I ask that is because I look at fiscal 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and the Development Modernization Enhancement, DME, has changed dramatically. 16 million, call it 17 million in 18, 25 million, I'm sure you have these numbers in front of you, 51 million in 20, 104 million in 21, and then drops down again to almost 70 million in 22. What factors drive this?
Thank you for that question. Sir, every year we go through the budget drill and we set priorities for the administrations. So what you will see in the variability with development and enhancement is a reflection of those priorities. So sometimes there is an improvement needed to Vista, and that rises to the level of funding. Other times it is not.
Okay, so I will tell you my concern, and that is when we see that Cerner's now on year 5 of 10, and we were told about this rollout taking place, and we look at 18, and we see the Development Modernization Enhancement being starved out of Vista. I have grave concern when I also hear that we are relying so heavily on Vista still, not only for separate facilities, 66, of the 171 facilities, but for the existing facility, even some of the functions, we are still relying upon Vista, and yet we're basically creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by starving that system of the investment that it needs so that it can perform the very duties that you're calling upon it for. Can you respond to that at all?
So, yes, sir, I appreciate the concern around the funding levels, particularly for development of Vista. What I will tell you, sir, is that our resources are limited, and right now, both our people and our budget are fully committed to that Cerner implementation.
Mr. McCune, I understand that your funds are limited, okay, and that you're budgeting, but when I see a system that's providing the vast amount of healthcare delivery information for you, and I see you starving it, and then you come in before us and tell us that it's not only being utilized for the vast majority of the facilities, but the facilities that are utilizing Cerner are still depending upon this system as well. Why would you still starve that system of the revenue it needs to provide the technology that is working?
Yes, sir. So most of our funding to date around Vista is with that integration with Cerner. So again, it is limited resources, sir. A lot of funding is being spent on migration of data, on building integrations between Vista and our legacy systems and the Cerner system. So yes, sir, you are seeing a tapering off of development on the Vista platform.
And at the same time, we've got a $1.1 billion investment that is being sent to Cerner, again, where we see 5 facilities that they're funding that aren't working properly, that are still relying on the Vista system. You think that's a wise allocation of funds, Mr. McCune?
So, sir, I can speak to the Vista system and our funding and allocations there. I would take it back for the record in our experts on the EHRM side of the house.
Okay. Ms. Sherfless McCormick, I am sorry, I went way over. Do you have any additional questions for this round? Mr. Shelf, do you have any additional questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up on your point there. Will there be an end to Vista, or will the integration, will it be required well beyond Cerner rollout? Because I think I'm hearing there may not be an actual end to Vista. Am I hearing that correctly?
So thank you for that question, sir. I think there's a couple of facets to that question. One is what is going to be replaced by Cerner? And of the, I think, 150 modules, all but 5 of those are targeted to be replaced by Cerner. So very little would be left over from a Vista perspective. On the Vista side of the house, we are cognizant that is an interim solution. That end date is indeterminate at this point. So we are making investments in Vista to make sure that it is resilient, that we maintain the level of performance that we have today. So we are not stopping work on Vista. We realize it's going to be around for a long time.
And the 5 that will remain, are they important? Are they minor?
So those 5, sir, will be replaced either in the short term or the long term. That list has been a little bit fluid, and so we're waiting for it to stabilize before we take action on that. But if we do indeed stabilize on those 5 modules, we will start to work on modernization plans around those 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I would like to thank this panel for joining us today, and this panel is excused from the witness table. We'll bring the second round up. Thank you very much. I would now like to welcome the witnesses to our second panel to the witness table. I ask you to please stand and raise your right hands. Mr. Baker, Mr. Jiffer, Mr. Levin. Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you so much. And let the record reflect that all witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Mr. Baker, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to offer your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rosendale and Ranking Member Sherfless McCormick, for holding this hearing today. With over $50 billion at stake, misinformation regarding Vista has been rampant. Numerous parties continue to repeat this misinformation in an effort to convince Congress that Vista is a problem in need of their solution. The primary success measurement for an electronic health record system at VA should be veteran health outcomes. That is, after all, the fundamental reason that VA and the EHR exist. The EHR program has effectively run a controlled experiment over the last 6 years, complete with a hypothesis, a control group, and metrics. This experiment has provided concrete proof that veterans achieve better medical outcomes when VA facilities use Vista than when they use the alternative. Because Vista excels at medical care, it sets a high comparative bar. Vista and the work processes encoded in it was designed, implemented, and honed by VA clinicians to do exactly what a clinician needs and exactly what a clinician wants. That is both its blessing and its curse. Independent surveys have shown that Vista is the most liked EHR by clinicians nationally, and that is among all EHRs. Lobbyists would have you believe that the IT difficulties of Vista are more important than the medical care advantages. That Vista is a problem because of its age, its complexity, and the language it's written in. In fact, at least one lobbyist would have you believe that Vista cannot be made better. That's provably false. During just my 4-year tenure, many improvements were introduced to Vista, including bed management, blood bank, pharmacy reengineering, registries, and numerous others, notably Cerner Labs. In fact, Vista can be difficult to modernize, but the difficulties in modernizing Vista stem not from the software, but from 3 root causes that come directly from VA itself. First, every time VA has attempted to replace Vista, starting in the year 2000 under the Healthy Vet program, and from 2017 under EHRM, VA has prohibited further modernization of Vista. This has included eliminating promising technologies such as Vista Exchange and EHMP, even when they were already in beta test. The fact that you're told that Vista cannot be made better, when the primary barrier to modernizing Vista has been a lack of investment for 16 of the last 24 years, is rich indeed. Second, years ago, VHA made the decision that veterans receive better medical care if each VA is allowed to tailor its care to local needs. That veterans in Fort Harrison VA can have different medical needs from those in West Palm Beach. This local control of medical care is a fundamental part of the medical culture of VHA, and Vista is reflective of that culture. This is where the soundbite, "Vista is not a single system, it is 130 separate systems," comes from. Local customizations, including local development staff, were a celebrated part of Vista development for many years, until the advent of the Gold Disc program in 2011. These local customizations are what has made designing, programming, and testing changes to Vista more difficult, because every change must be tested to work with each Vista instance. Third, federal pay grades and procurement practices have eroded the base of skilled software developers needed to maintain a complex EHR product. Capping salaries at GS-14 levels for the most skilled federal IT staff has caused them to seek other employment. And VA continuously awards contracts for complex Vista improvements to companies that cannot employ the necessary skills at the rates that were bid to win the work. They would rather tell VA, "We can't find months programmers," without adding "at those rates" to justify why they can't deliver. VA has repeatedly failed at efforts to replace, not to modernize, Vista. Unless a decision is made that software standardization is more important than local control of healthcare at VA, attempts to replace Vista with a product that does not support that fundamental part of the VHA culture are doomed to failure. Mr. Chairman, misinformation regarding Vista is being promulgated to justify the now $50 billion need for the EHRM program. But the EHRM program itself has provided the best proof that they're untrue. After 6 years, veterans continue to achieve better healthcare outcomes in VA facilities that use Vista. That remains the single most important fact that you will hear today. I commend this committee for demanding the actual facts regarding Vista, its role in veteran healthcare, and its ability to be modernized. And I look forward to working with you and answering your questions as you further search out these facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. The written statement of Mr. Baker will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Gifford, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rosendale, Ranking Member Cherfilus McCormick, and the subcommittee today for the opportunity to appear. As a veteran, I'm a patient in VHA's health system. I'm a beneficiary in the benefit system and now pre-registered in VA's burial benefits. And as a more than 28-year career Marine infantry officer with 4 combat deployments, I fully empathize with all of our veteran men and women who endure both the visible and invisible wounds of military service.
There is much misunderstanding around VA healthcare in general. VA healthcare is unlike commercial systems. VA is funded by government appropriation versus commercial health systems who operate on a business revenue model. In commercial healthcare, each patient is eligible for all services, where in VA, eligibility is based on complex service-connected conditions. VA healthcare is more specialized and expansive than commercial systems, comprising unique capabilities such as prosthetics, long-term care, and dental, among others. These are substantial differences, even as compared to Department of Defense healthcare, and the first set of challenges for any commercial EHR to be successfully implemented into VHA. The bottom line is that federal law, regulation, and policy have created this unique health system, and the Vista EHR is representative of those complex and unique business rules. So it may come as no surprise that when a commercial EHR programmed for different financial frameworks with significantly different eligibility rules and not addressing unique VA clinical services, that there are problems, and problems that can't be overcome by change management. Without substantial customization, no commercial EHR could address the business rules that law, regulation, and policy mandate for veteran health care. So if you didn't have a business system configured like Vista, you'd have to create or heavily customize a system to perform just like it. In the remainder of this hearing, we will get into greater detail about Vista, its modernization efforts, and some additional facts and misconceptions, but allow me to offer some highlights. First, Vista is more than an EHR. It is what professionals term an enterprise resource planning, or ERP system, which has grown over the years to encompass many administrative, financial, and other modules, a number of these which will live on. Second, it is not, I repeat, not a, quote, IT system, but rather a business and mission system. Why does this matter? First, because the business, in this case VHA, must take prime ownership to include the lifecycle management, capital investment, and change management, with OI&T playing a supporting technical role. And third, some would have you believe that Vista has not been modernized, but that assertion is predicated on the fallacy that modernization can only be achieved by replacement. Tech modernization, as defined by Gartner, Forrester, and others, can be, they say, can be achieved in a myriad of other ways: rehosting, moving to the cloud, refactoring, optimizing the existing code, and encapsulating, exposing to APIs, all of which were done to Vista during my tenure. Also, let me offer, in many respects, veteran healthcare business and technology discussions remain mired in the 2017 timeframe. It was in this timeframe that the pursuit of a fully longitudinal health record was revalidated with an assumption that it must be on the same platform in order for this to be achieved. And I will tell you, in 2023, with the maturity and adoption of health information exchanges and health standards, that is no longer the case. In an era of increasing technical debt and mounting technology modernization costs, the Congress must determine where the greatest need is for precious taxpayer dollars. Presently, there are roughly 300,000 active duty members who matriculate from military service to VA every year. Last year, on the community care side, VA saw 6 million referrals for 36 million episodes of care. So to compare 300,000 one-time transfer to those staggering numbers, there is no doubt that the latter is the substantially larger problem set and needs to be addressed. And finally, in an era where technology plays an increasingly mainstream and critical role in healthcare delivery, VA must begin to operate more efficiently and effectively, as do its commercial and nonprofit healthcare system partners, who are well on their way in this regard. These systems understand that technology and information technology is the success path, and reciprocally, health systems cannot hire their way out of the problem, much as VHA attempts to do every year. Mr. Chairman, thank you and the subcommittee for your time today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giffer. The written statement of Mr. Giffer will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Levin, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Thank you for the privilege of testifying before you today. Thank you for the privilege of testifying before you today regarding the electronic health record modernization effort at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm deeply grateful to you, Chairman Rosendale, Ranking Member Sheffield McCormick, and members of this subcommittee for the opportunity to share with you my perspective on one of the largest civilian information technology projects in history. Our commitment to our nation's veterans transcends party lines and political ideology. In an era of especially deep ideological divide and social tension, I applaud your leadership, Mr. Chairman, in soliciting the best ideas and constructive, objective, fact-based perspectives from across the spectrum. During my time in public service and under the leadership of Assistant Secretary Baker, with whom I'm delighted to appear today, this afternoon, I had the honor of working on several medical information technology systems that are still in use today. Especially relevant to this testimony are the Joint Longitudinal Viewer, JLV, originally known as JANUS, and the Blue Button Personal Health Record that was launched during the Democratic administration and was warmly embraced by the most recent Republican one as a fundamental component of any effort to empower patients in their healthcare decisions. And JLV enables hundreds of thousands of clinicians to see health records across platforms every day. In this context, health data interoperability, I respectfully offer my observations. There are 3 issues before the government regarding Vista at Veterans Affairs. 1, that billions of dollars already spent on the commercial implementation will not scale to enterprise-wide clinical care services on the current path, budget, or timeline. 2, that VA can and should sustain the data interfaces and connection frameworks already built to send and receive data from MHS Genesis. 3, and most important of all, that VA consolidate its current instances of Vista onto a VA-centered clinical workflow and augment the Vista model to receive data from third-party providers. As you'll hear from my colleagues and other witnesses, the differences in VA healthcare between points of care is simply not that large. It is not tens of billions of dollars large. Veterans receive terrific health care, but their care is delivered with different processes depending upon which hospital or clinic they go to. That is the primary problem. In my opinion, the department should not announce its intention to change the contract unless and until it has a backup plan in place. That plan cannot be to, quote, revert back to Vista in its current form, or anything that concedes to VA's continued digital isolation and process insularity. Switching back to Vista and walking away does not fix the root problem. How do we address this issue? First and foremost, cloud technologies are now stable and mature enough to enable consolidation onto an authentically single platform. Additionally, there have been substantial improvements to the code base that are now available to VA from the commercial sector. It would be straightforward to reinstantiate OSERA with a powerful charter and legislative mandate. Moreover, commercially available data management infrastructure has made substantial progress in the last 5 years. There are no technology impediments here. I'd like to repeat that. There are no technology impediments here. This is simply a matter of political will, imaginative leadership, and execution accountability. Indeed, these policy changes, consolidation onto an enterprise clinical workflow, and adoption of proven platform and data management services would accelerate health record modernization at a fraction of the cost now earmarked for EHRM. The transcendent goal of our work has to be the continuously better care of healthcare of veterans. Unless and until VA resolves its internal tension around consolidated care pathways and comprehensive data management, no amount of technology will automate its operations, and no amount of money will solve its policy problems. Thank you for my opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levin. The written statement of Mr. Levin will be entered into the hearing record. We are now going to proceed to questioning, and I will start with the first 5 minutes worth. Mr. Baker, I have heard it said that Vista was developed as a healthcare delivery software and that the Cerner Oracle system was developed as a billing software. What is the basic differences is that, and what problems does it present? I
think it goes back to the environments they grew up in. On the commercial side, billing is where EHR is started, to be able to accurately bill and get paid. On the VA side, they didn't have to worry about billing out for most of the tenure of Vista. So Vista focused on keeping a record that was completely oriented around how good is the medical care we're providing this veteran. Whereas commercial EHRs tend to be excellent at the financial side and have added more recently the medical record side of things, at least to the extent that Vista has. The difference there is clearly on the focus. You know, as I mentioned in mine, there's a culture difference between the VA system and the commercial systems related to the preeminence of medical care. Congress provides an appropriation that provides most of the money that VHA needs. They don't have to worry as much about, am I billing things out, am I going to be able to pay people, as a commercial EHR does. They both have very valid reasons for why they grew up, but what we're trying to do now with EHRM is take a financial system and lay it over top of a medical record system.
And I think that very clearly describes exactly the frustrations that I have had since I was exposed to this, and that is that the benefit, the healthcare benefit, is not being provided properly. And I think that this has been expressed by the docs and physicians at the facility at Graham Manstaff. Mr. Baker and Mr. Levin, there have been previous efforts to modernize Vista as well as replace it. First of all, in the 2000s, there was a replacement effort. I understand it cost about $600 million. What was this project's genesis? How did it perform? And what happened to it?
Well, since I was the person who terminated the Healthy Vet program, I'll speak to that one. In roughly the 2000 timeframe, VA decided that it could replace Vista by developing a new system called Healthy Vet, and they launched down that path. A good friend of mine was the deputy CIO at that time, and his responsibility was to terminate all spending on Vista so that it could be focused on Healthy Vet. There were a few good pieces of software that came out of Healthy Vet. The My Healthy Vet website that you see now came out of that, as well as a few other things that we were able to add to Vista. But by and large, that $600 million, by the time I got there, it was obvious that was a wasted program. And so we terminated it and focused on the Vista improvements that I mentioned in my testimony.
Very good. Now, Mr. Baker, next came the IEHR between 2011 and 2014. VA and DOD attempted to build a new joint EHR. I understand that that one cost about $1 billion. How was that different, and why was it abandoned?
So I was very key and core to IEHR, and I would describe IEHR this way. It was a battle between VA and DOD. VA had a requirement that the only EHR they could use was Vista. DOD had a requirement that they could use any EHR but Vista. And we spent a lot of time in that battle. Now, let me, since Dr. Levin sees that time much more rationally than I do, given how deeply I was involved, let me just ask him if he has any further comments there.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. I do have a couple of comments. I think that there's a gigantic difference in that that we ought to acknowledge that we have tried to replace Vista a couple of times, but our modernization efforts, looking at Vista holistically and trying to module by module, object by object, replace it, upgrade it, modernize it, transfer it to the cloud, this has never actually received full attention and support from the institution. So I think one of the conversations that we're having today, and IEHR is a perfect example of that, is to distinguish and differentiate what is a replacement and what is a modernization. The single biggest problem with Vista, at least in my opinion, it has nothing to do with MUMPS or the availability of the language competencies of any individual programmer. As Secretary Baker has pointed out many times, if you speak 11 computer languages, you can learn the 12th one with not too much extra effort. So I think that that's a little bit of a red herring to throw up the particular language expression of the system. The number one handicap of Vista today is its lack of modularity. That's work that Secretary Baker led when he was in office that I participated in, and I think that Vista itself, or any EHR, would benefit tremendously from attention on its modularity, its extensibility, its scalability, its testability. These are things that are fixable inside the incumbent program today.
Thank you very much. Representative Sherfless McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Levin, in your written testimony, you stated that the department should not announce its intention to change the contract unless and until it has a backup plan in place. Furthermore, you stated that that plan cannot be reverted back to Vista in its current form or anything that concedes to VA's continued digital isolation and process insularity. I just want to state that I cannot agree with you more. The EHRM program is one particular case study that is part of a larger issue surrounding VA's inability to manage and contract for large IT systems. Whether it is EHRM, supply chain, or HR modernization, the lack of progress and success is not contained to a single program. Without real program and acquisition management at VA, this program will continue to not be successful. Mr. Levin, would you be supportive of a holistic changes with how VA manages and is held accountable for these large IT modernization efforts?
Thank you very much for your question, Congresswoman. The short answer is yes. I could not agree with you more. I'd like to introduce you to some members of my family to find somebody to agree with. The things that we could do structurally, operationally, inside of VA, I think are very accessible to us. I can't explain why we don't do them on a regular basis, but written down plans, accountability metrics, performance metrics, and I don't just mean by individuals, I mean by the systems that we're putting in place. I think that we've confused, that we can have probably a larger societal discussion about this. We've confused the difference between best efforts and outcomes. And I think that, at least in my world, the commercial world that I live in today, my customers don't very much care how hard I work. They very much care about whether I deliver my promises on time. There's a huge difference, a vast difference, between how the processes and the accountability metrics, the hiring that we have to go through at any government institution. Of course, VA is not unique in that way at all. But we can do better. There are lots of things in the private sector, obviously, that I think that we would agree are sometimes inequitable or sometimes ineffective. But the pendulum has swung too far, in my opinion, in my personal opinion. The pendulum has swung too far, and we should be able to structure programs inside of government, inside of VA, that hold the leadership accountable, that have sensible budgets associated with them, and that have performance-measured outcomes. I don't think that we're doing that sufficiently well right now.
Thank you. Given that EHRM was allowed to be awarded as a sole source contract, do you think that the VA's requirement requires more checks and balances internally before awarding future contracts for IT modernization, given the results we've seen thus far?
Again, thank you for your question. I believe that my co-panelists will have divergent views on this. I was relatively close to the process. As a private sector observer, I was relatively close to the process. And I don't think that it was unfair. There were some political exigencies, there were operational exigencies at the time, and I think that if we could wind back history, it wasn't so much that we made a decision. I was a very loud advocate of not going the direction that we went, but I had the privilege of speaking to a senior-most leader at the time who was part of the decision-making and who reported to me, okay, the decision's made, now what? And I said to that individual, well, now it's just an engineering problem. Anybody can do that, right? And I still believe that. I really do. So I think that if I can recommend attention of this committee, the focus of this committee would not be so much on how did we get to the DNF and why did we follow the DoD. Those are important questions. Those are policy questions. It's what all happened afterwards, where many of us who were loudly advocating the misdirection, the misapplication, the lack of framework, the lack of accountability, the personalities that were involved, and there was almost no accountability whatsoever. I think that that's where I would direct this committee's attention, and I think that that's what we could be doing much better at VA.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Representative Self.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the languages, though. That seems to be a major point for the VA. As we've said, other old languages are used. Is there any other language that could be used to modernize Vista?
So as modules are changed in Vista, frequently they are written in other languages. In my written testimony, I talk about VA's attempt to implement Cerner Labs, which is written in a completely different language. The points at which MUMPS is critical is as you understand the complexities in the architecture of Vista and making changes to that as you add the new modules that are going to interface to it. And so that MUMPS expertise is necessary, but even in saying MUMPS, what you're really saying is expertise about Vista as a large-scale application. It is, by definition, by what it tries to do, a very complex piece of software because it is also a very accurate and very extensive piece of medical software. We want it to be as good as it is because we get our medical care from that. But the short answer is yes. Frequently, the new pieces are written in different languages, but you have to have some level of MUMPS expertise to be able to interface to what remains there from the Vista system.
So if I understood you correctly, surely there are people other than your more mature MUMPS coders that understand the Vista architecture.
It's not something that you want to give a neophyte access to. It's like having them drive, your Maserati. You're having your 16-year-old son drive your Maserati. Not a good idea. You'd like them to get some training on other things. And again, a lot of times the problems that VA runs into from a procurement standpoint is that they award contracts when even those senior level people that are necessary to guide the more junior people, they're just too expensive for that contract. And so you end up with a solution that doesn't work.
I understand that clinicians like Vista, IT does not. What are the IT reasons to cancel Vista? And then we'll get to the clinicians.
Do you want to take any of that?
Congressman, I would probably reject that characterization. I mean, IT, and certainly what's not to like is that when you're working with brittle systems, that are not, refactored and hosted in, the best environments, right? And it's a work in progress on Vista. Ultimately, when you back at 2017, and I was admittedly not with the agency, it was an agency decision to go to Vista. It was not a vote of no confidence within OINT. And I think the other thing, too, is to get back to your language point, at some point, the increasing trend you see in all in all verticals and healthcare and others is managed services where companies that do this work well can take on bits and pieces, those modules we were talking about. And you're going to see more of that, right? Companies that do pharmacy real well, companies that do scheduling real well. The VA should not be in that business, right? They should look to who are the vendors that are best of suite with regard to those capabilities and incorporate them. And at that point, you've shifted the risk to the vendor, to the commercial provider, and you don't care if it's written in MUMPS or C++ or COBOL or whatever language it's in.
If I could add, sir, the interesting point that the chairman was making earlier about the same number of staff. The IT people that work on Vista love the product. They love the product. The affinity, the people that I have heard from inside VA since they found out I was going to testify, telling me, please do this, has been extensive. And so there is this large group of people, several thousand, that know this product well and want to see it succeed. And they're part of what we look to engage with the open source community. At the time we were doing that. And they would like to continue to participate in moving this product forward, and they have a lot of expertise.
Interesting. So that brings me to a simple question. What advantages to the veteran does Cerner bring?
I don't think I'm going to be somebody who's going to give you any of those. I'm not aware of things that for the veteran today are better because of the Cerner implementation in the 5 facilities than they were before Vista was there. And I'll ask if my partners want to say anything.
Yeah, maybe as the lone veteran, I'll hazard a guess here and say that ultimately it should be about the clinician deciding that the care outcome is going to be better for the veteran. Largely as the veteran, and I saw this in some of the earliest communication about how great the new EMR was. And again, as a veteran patient, it doesn't matter to me. I shouldn't know whether it's Vista or whatever the EMR is that the care is being provided for. At the point that I care about what the system is that's being provided, I'm probably being negatively impacted.
But I'm speaking to former secretaries. So in your view, or in the view of the current VA, I'm starting to not understand any advantage of the Cerner.
I'm not aware
I'm
of
not talking, I understand you're a veteran, I'm a veteran, and it should be transparent to us. But at your level, at the decision-making, the policy level, what are the advantages that Cerner will bring?
The theoretical advantages, I don't believe they've been realized yet, is that Cerner would be easier to maintain and easier to move forward than Vista in the out years of the program. That would be the theoretical advantages, but there is no hard evidence that that theoretical advantage will actually be true. And the cost, in my opinion, is going to be substantially more than it would be from a Vista perspective for the near and the midterm.
Okay, you've just gone back to my first question. What is the IT advantage of Cerner? Doesn't seem to be one. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
We'll come back around for another round, so you can have some more. Now we're starting to get to the crux of where I wanted to go for this next round of questioning, and that is the investment as opposed to the theoretical promise of benefit in the future, okay? Mr. Baker and Mr. Levin, let's turn down the modernization efforts. What was the purpose of the Gold Disc project? How much did it cost, and what did it accomplish?
So, Secretary Baker, I don't remember how much it cost, but I remember it not being very expensive. Is that true?
My best understanding is it was single-digit millions,
Yeah, that's right.
probably in the 5. I would want to ask VA for the specific numbers, but it was not an expensive program.
Yeah, I would have hazarded. I'm glad that Secretary Baker went first. I would have guessed it was much smaller than that. The outcome of the Gold Disc program, which I want to immediately confess, was not perfectly successful. It was a great first start. There was a tremendous amount of resistance to consolidating that because, of course, that was the premonition of consolidating workflows and understanding the differences and highlighting the variations in the clinical care pathways at the various installations. So I don't want to make it sound like the Golden Disc was, in fact, what its name implies. The nomenclature amplifies a little bit the success. That notwithstanding, probably the most important outcome, I'm looking at Secretary Baker when I say this, was that we consolidated FileMan. So the most challenging, the most difficult, arguably if we use an anatomical analogy, it wasn't the heart and brains, but it was one of the vital organs. And we went after it first because it was difficult, because we wanted to demonstrate that, in fact, you could start modularizing the code, you could start creating test harnesses around the code, that you could do what we're discussing here today. This goes back 12 years ago, sir, right?
And for several $1 million, you were able to accomplish this?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Baker, Mr. Levin, why weren't you able to eliminate all the differences between the Vista instances?
Well, the most important thing was it was a joint program between VHA and OINT, and we got to the point where there were differences that VHA was unwilling to, if you will, exert their internal political capital to get their organization to agree to. And when we achieved, we had gotten to about 95% commonality across the platform. When I left, we felt that was a good start, and we felt that it would continue on. And I want to commend Mr. McCune. My understanding is that it has continued on. and that they are now achieving, if not a single gold disc, but very close to that with Vista at this point. And so his efforts on that part have been great from our perspective.
Very good. Mr. Baker, Mr. Levin. Vista Evolution began in 2014, and it was canceled in 2017 when Cerner started. It was estimated to cost about $5.3 billion over a decade. What were its goals and what was accomplished with that program?
I don't know that I can speak to the goals. I think VA's goals were bigger. It was developed after I left, and so I think the goals were bigger. I actually was at one of the contractors at that point that was developing that. What was developed was something called Vista Exchange, the ability for a Vista, or a clinician, the data provided to a clinician to come from a wide variety of data sources, multiple EHRs, multiple data sources, and present a single computable view to the clinician, and a web-based version of the CPRS interface, so a modernization of that into what's called a widgets-based interface. Both of those were in beta test, and other things were in beta test in the Hampton Roads facility when that project was canceled.
Okay, so this question is going to be for all three witnesses. Regardless of the EHR system chosen, is the VA ever going to be able to accomplish a monumental rip and replace project? And should they even be trying to do that? We can start over to my right, Mr. Levin.
Congressman, with respect, I believe that the answer to your question is no. It's not so much even a question of the competencies and skill. It is certainly not a question of the commitment of the people who work at VA. It is absolutely a question of the structure, the accountability metrics, the frameworks in which they have to operate today. So under its current framework and structure, the answer is no.
Over the past decade, commercial entities have gone away from big ERP, enterprise resource planning, rip and replace. It's just fraught with too much peril and failure. The incremental modernization path is generally the one you see followed. I would like to layer in too at some point that any organization, whether it be the VA or a major healthcare system, really only undergoes these sorts of changes once every 30 to 40 years. I mean, it's almost like big iron in the sense of they're there. That's look at Vista. It was there for 40 years. It's still there, and so the knowledge base around putting in new system in whatever manner, it's fairly limited and fairly exclusive. It's not astronaut exclusive, but there's only, when you look across the executive base in the U.S., there's only dozens of people that have really done this. And I can tell you that at VA, during my time and others' times, there are none of those people, right? And so the requirement to leverage external advisors and to visit, and I could talk more about this later, I don't think that has been anywhere near sufficiently leveraged. I know when I compare during my time the level of governance that was exerted on the program compared to what I've talked to with some of my commercial counterparts, it's not even a shadow of what they did in terms of these programmatic deployments.
Thank you. Mr. Baker?
So no is the simple answer. The government in general is not good at large IT programs. There was a point in time in about 2010 when the National Defense Authorization Act included the language that 16% of large federal IT programs succeed. The EHRM is the largest federal IT program. It's not being done by DoD. VA does not have the same program management capabilities that DoD has. Especially looking at the evidence of the growth in the budget of the program, it's a very good indicator that at this point in time, VA has no chance of actually succeeding on this program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Sheriff McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jaffer, what role did you play in Cerner's EHR modernization at the VA?
So I feel like I'm back at my confirmation hearing. Certainly the Office of Primary Responsibility for EHRM and VA very deliberately was segmented into a specific office. During my time, the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization, and then it was supported by two business units that were the existing EMR owners, VHA as the business owner and OIT as the technical owner and operator of the system. And so both VHA and OIT supported the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization in their programmatic oversight and scheduling of those wave deployments.
Do you think in retrospect that was a bad decision to have OIT on the outside of the program with CIO having such a limited role?
When you look at innovation and putting in new applications and new systems, often you have to get past the current, the existing system owners, both the business and the IT. So I don't think that was necessarily a bad decision. Each organization does it a little differently. I had a conversation with a commercial CIO as just kind of a refresher for this panel the other day. He elected, like in his own cylinder of excellence, to have a separate organization. So there's pluses and minuses to both approaches, and that's the one the VA selected.
I recognize you entered VA service a few months after the Oracle Cerner contract was signed. From your perspective now, do you think the strategy to do a sole source contract with Oracle Cerner was a good decision?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, in that time frame, the premise, when you looked at where technology was, or more importantly, where it was not in terms of health information exchange, again, you could make a case that if you were going to derive the benefit of having that longitudinal record, all the way from the time someone enters military service until they're buried, in a VA cemetery, that it needed to be on a single platform. And that's why I said a lot has changed in the past 6 years, certainly in the development of the health information exchanges. And then when you layer in this whole notion that you have this smoldering ember of a problem over here with 300,000 people changing hands every year, and over here you have 6 million community care referrals, 36 million episodes of care. That's only going to grow larger. We need to kind of make a rational decision about where those precious those tax dollars are paid. And by the way, where you're having that progress on the Joint Health Information Exchange, that can also accrue benefits back into the DoD VA system and that data exchange.
Do you think the VA did appropriate planning, research, and standard program management related to this contract and program?
As I mentioned just a few minutes ago, when you compare and contrast what the VA has done and likely continues to do, and compare it to any one of the number of large commercial systems that have been on a similar electronic health record journey, you would be concerned about the disparity between the governance and the efforts that these commercial systems have exhibited compared to VA. It's what Secretary Baker said too, is by and large, not to give an excuse, government agencies do an exceptionally poor job at managing, and I would call them, I said it before, business transformations. They're not IT programs. It's not an enterprise IT. It's not a security program. We're not putting in a new service management tool. This is a business and mission healthcare system program.
My final question for you is, do you think it was a wise decision to deploy Cerner EHR in the middle of a pandemic in a facility that was not yet ready, with technology that was not ready, just a few weeks before a presidential election?
Well, I know that the original date, having been in those meetings, was October of 2019, and the decision at that point on go, no go was really predicated around what the chairman and others have talked about, was those 73 different applications or interfaces that Millennium was going to have to draw services from, and those were just not ready. And so that was the initial decision to push off. And then at the point that it went into the following year, it really was more in VHA and to the facility, to Spokane's decision as to when they would be ready to go live. So I think that decision was really pushed down to the lowest level possible, certainly to the medical center director at Spokane.
Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Representative Self.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given y'all's history with Vista, order of magnitude, What would it take to rewrite Vista in dollars? Order of magnitude.
I would hope I'm on the high side with $10 billion.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Self. I'm going to go into these instances. I've got a batch of questions about that. This question is for anyone who wants to answer. Why do the different Vista instances exist, and how are they different? How much of, what I'm trying to figure out is how much of each instant is identical, okay, that they all match up, and what are the examples of the differences of the instances?
So I'll start off, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure Secretary Baker and Mr. Levin will jump in. As you heard earlier, it's the rough average is about 95% commonality between the 133 instances. I would say, again, it's a business and mission decision as to that variability, right? And the first thing you have to realize is, not every VA facility is the same. There are a range of clinical capabilities, all the way from, and let me just use the Northwest where it's currently being deployed, all the way from Puget Sound, which is a level 1A facility with all the top levels of care, ICU, ORs, things like that. And then you compare it to Spokane, which is down to level 3. And so you could imagine that based on those different levels of facility care and those clinical capabilities, there would have to be some variability or differences in the instances, and I'll pass it off from there.
So basically, it's talking about so I'm understanding the types of procedures that are offered in each of these facilities, some being much more complex and some being just a standard primary care.
I mean, literally different clinical capabilities. Again, Puget Sound has an OR and an ER, and I don't believe.
So outside of that, let's just say outside of that, if we have similar, we'll call similar facilities offering similar procedures, okay, what are the differences? Are we still dealing with 95% commonality, or is it greater?
I think today you're dealing with more. At the time that I left off, there were a few packages where there were alternative versions of the package that one facility might choose to implement and another facility would choose the alternative. And again, this comes from the day and time when the way packages got developed is one facility would build them and another facility would build an alternative to that, and various hospitals would choose which of those they liked. So by the time we started the Gold Disc program, there was a plethora of what's called Class 3 software.
Were they all still communicating?
Communicating to the sense that you can see the record from any Vista system in any other Vista system. I don't know whether that data is computable in all circumstances when it goes from one Vista system to another Vista system. So it depends on your definition of, quote, communicating. Okay. But there was a plethora of this Class 3 software, and what we did was basically ask VHA to settle on one version of each of those packages and then make that the standard. And they got down to about 5% where they said, we need to offer both of these or all three of these because we can't tell the facilities to just go with one. So the variation wasn't, if you will, things all over the map. It was, oh, you've chosen the 1A option instead of the 1B option for your facility, but we support both the 1A and the 1B option across the enterprise.
Okay, so they were supporting them, so to make sure that I'm clear, so when I'll say communicating, so you could view it, regardless of which facility you were in, you could view it.
Yes.
Could you enter data, if a veteran came from one facility to the other, could you still enter data if you were at a different facility?
My understanding is that the veteran would have a new record, a new record at the new VA. So, for example, I live in Florida. Lots of people will come down to live in Florida for 6 months and a day for tax reasons, but they will have a record in their Florida hospital as well as their Ann Arbor hospital, for example, and you can view, but they will have separate records between the two hospitals. That's my understanding. And it's subject to correction by VA.
No, that's correct, and I can use myself as an example. When on active duty, it had to be seen for a minor accident in Minneapolis. I had a record there, and I have a record in VAMC DC, right? And the two are just related.
And again, can either facility make amendments on either record? Or can you only make amendments in your facility for that record?
I believe that you would have to specifically go to the other record and sign in as a user on the other Vista system to make actual changes in the other record, is I believe the answer.
Okay, so let me ask you this, does it come up as like a file, as an additional file so that you can see it as part of the patient's record?
Yeah, my understanding is that you get an alert as a doctor that says there are other records, other Vista records available on this patient. Would you like to view them? Okay. Again, I want to leave this subject to correction by VA. They know the Vista system in depth much better than I do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I am out of time myself. I'm going to turn this over to Representative Sherfless McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Mr. Baker. You participated in VA's IEHR program, which eventually collapsed, and the transition to Vista Evolution, the program which has stopped before the current Oracle Cerner EHRM. A very conservative estimate from the GAO using VA data show that efforts costing at least $1.1 billion. What makes you think going back to Vista is a good idea right now?
So I base my assessment on of why you go back to Vista on two things that I've talked about. One is just based on the track record at this point of the program. For someone like me who's seen a lot of these programs, it's obvious this program has failed. The question is how much money we'll spend before we fully recognize that. And the second thing is, one of the main metrics I use is, are veterans getting better health care? If today veterans were getting better health care in facilities where the commercial product was being used, my view would be entirely different. You know, compared to the amount of money we spend on medical care at VHA, $50 billion is a relatively small amount. But if you're not going to produce better health care, then why spend that money? Because it's all about better health care for veterans. And so that's my reason why I believe we've got to go back to Vista and then a path forward. I don't think Vista is the end solution. I want to make that very clear. We are at this point now because we have failed on EHRM and we need a solution for the midterm while we figure out how to get to the long term.
Thank you. And do you have ideas for how VA could descope the current contract with Oracle Cerner and use it for the bare minimum services, and then use other IT service providers and companies to fill in the gaps so as to diversify risk?
I do, and it would take us much longer than we have in testimony. Sadly, I think about this a lot. Something about VA gets into your blood, and I can speak for all three people here. We remain dedicated public servants, even though we're not getting paid by the government at this point. And so, yes, we've talked about this. We have lots of thoughts on it. We'd be happy to share those with you.
That would be wonderful. And given what you know about the IT industry, would you have done a sole source, no bid contract like VA under the Trump administration did? And would you have mandated the use of an integrator?
I'm not a fan of integrators on large programs like this, just from everything I've seen from that standpoint, and my track record speaks to that. No, I didn't like the sole source. I'm loath to criticize people that were in the arena at the time, but it was an odd way to go at things.
I read your written testimony and agree with you that the VA culture of allowing customization in its medical centers has contributed greatly to failed attempts at modernization. Is there any management structure in place at the VA where Undersecretary for Health and the CIO would be required to sit down and make decisions based upon priorities for deploying a modern EHR?
I'll just start by saying it depends on what administration you're talking about. When Undersecretary Shinseki, absolutely. But I know it varied in other organizations.
And I would add to that I know towards the end of my tenure, we attempted to re-implement the OMBA 130 required investment review board process, managing information as a strategic resource And I can tell you that was met with not a lot of enthusiasm. But there's a reason that OMB circular exists, because you have, and we saw it within our unfunded requirements process every year, you had 10x of requirements chasing 3x of IT spend dollars. And if you didn't deliberately, through an investment review board process, prioritize and be very clear-eyed about where you're going to spend it, it was going to sort itself out, and probably not in a very clean way.
I'm looking for an opportunity to produce legislation this Congress to provide the VA with tools to make consensus decisions that put the care of veterans and the well-being of frontline staff at the forefront of requirements development, and not cater to fractions within the VA that prefer one software product over another. I don't care what system the VA uses. I want veterans and employees to be delivered what they are promised and what taxpayers are paying for. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative. Okay. Mr. Levin, I would ask a couple of more questions before we let you guys get out of here. VA leaders have said many times that they want an EHR with one instance to eliminate the variations from facility to facility. And yet, I hear regularly, almost every hearing that we hold, that if you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA, because they are so different. So my question is that realistic, and how can it be accomplished?
Thank you, Chairman. It is realistic. It can be accomplished. Let's spend a couple seconds on how we got to now. There are endogenous reasons, internal reasons for the differences between the different facility. And these are good reasons. These are things that we need to protect and nourish. The VA has a culture of innovation. We spend a lot of money every year with new medicines, new therapies, new processes, new instruments. Secretary Gaffer mentioned during his remarks that it was a business decision. I strongly agree with him, and I strongly agree that that was the right thing to do. The VA is a greenhouse of training and new ideas, and you actually want that. We don't want to force or force feed some kind of rigid, unchangeable structure, because they are also teaching hospitals. Something like a third of all practicing physicians in the United States did at least some part of their residency at the VA. And you need the VA to be vibrant that way, to be intellectually challenging, to show the hardest cases, to get the best care in order to attract the talent. But as Secretary Baker said, and I'll say it slightly differently, for many of us, those who are veterans and those who are not, those who are in public service today and those who are not, VA is a transcendent moral cause. It's a moral cause of our country, and I think that we made a promise that we need to keep. And one of the ways that we keep that promise is by making sure that we're at the vanguard, at the forefront of that kind of care. The differences between the institutions, we've talked a lot about, well, how many of the clinical care pathways are the same, or how much of the code base are the same. I respectfully submit that that may not be the right metrics. It's an easy metric. We know how to measure lines of code. We know how to articulate the differences. The difference that I would propose is that we see how much it costs. How much does it cost to sustain these various pathways, and do they actually deliver superior care? So the trade space, the decision that we have to make together as a country is, how do we sustain and maintain and nourish the vibrancy of those environments, but not charge the taxpayer tens of billions of dollars because we're trying to let every VA hospital do it by themselves. This is, at the end of the day, this is an implementation framework question. This is a question of authority. This is a question of accountability, and it's not a technology problem. I think that we can achieve it quite easily.
So it seems like the VA is counting on Oracle, CERN, or EHR to force some kind of a standardization on the Veterans Health Administration without doing any of the hard work to change how the medical centers operate. And the result is breaking the EHR as well as the medical centers, where they actually are functioning. What do you think is going to happen if they continue down that road?
Mr. Chair, I think that this is a shared responsibility. If you look at the implementation frameworks at other large clinics, the one that I have in mind specifically is Mayo, but there are many of them that we could talk about. There's a halfway point. It doesn't have to be all one way, my way or the highway. There are some vendors that do it that way. or the way that we've done it at the VA, where it's sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom right until the moment that we're trying to modernize the program and exchange data, even between Vista systems. As Secretary Baker described, we can't do that. So the VA, I believe, is actually primarily responsible. I don't want to exonerate any vendor here, right? But the VA is responsible, should have been responsible for making sure that they had consolidated those clinical care pathways. I think the canonical number is 6 is what we're looking for now, but not 131.
And I think, Mr. Chairman, when you look at the capability sets that the EMR vendor, EHR vendor is going to provide, I think there's actually fairly good agreement between VHA and the vendor in terms of what compromises those capability sets.
Thank you so much. Representative, have any more questions? We're all clear? Okay. I want to thank our witnesses on both panels for joining us today. I do appreciate it. It was incredible information. This is not a conversation about IT systems. When we get caught up in that, we lose sight of our purpose. It has to be a conversation about whether the VA healthcare is meeting our veterans' needs and what policies and systems support that. It also cannot be a conversation about hypotheticals. It has to be grounded in hard data, and I appreciate our witnesses helping us better understand that data. By every measure that's been presented here today, Vista is still performing well. And the VA is still very dependent upon it, even after being put on a starvation diet in the early years of Cerner. By choice or by default, the VA will probably continue to rely on Vista for years into the future. And I realize that not everyone likes that reality, but we all need to recognize it. It certainly would not have been my choice to operate 2 different EHRs in a healthcare system. But I think it would do a tremendous disservice to the veterans who rely on the VA for their care to neglect or even dismantle the only platform that supports that care effectively and safely. We need to be identifying the Vista improvements that are most badly needed and make the most sense and get them done in decades, not in months or in years. That's what I will be advocating. Thank you all again for your participation in today's hearing. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you.